You wake before the world. The sky is still draped in night's quiet veil, and for a moment, nothing is asked of you. No decisions, no expectations, just silence. In this soft beginning, you remember that Marcus Aurelius often started his day like this, not as a ruler burdened by power, but as a student of life, preparing himself for what would come. He wasn't writing speeches or planning campaigns. He was sitting, reflecting, reminding himself who he was and who he wanted to be. When you arise in the morning, he wrote, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. This wasn't lofty inspiration. It was a tool, a ritual, a way to begin on solid ground before the chaos could knock at the door. You feel that too, that need to center before the noise starts. In a world that wakes up rushing, Marcus chose to pause, not to escape responsibility, but to meet it on his own terms, to face the day as a Stoic rather than be carried away by it. He wrote not to perform, but to return to truth, to discipline to himself. There's something in that you understand, and maybe you felt the same pull, to check in with your inner world before letting the outer one invade. That's what this channel is about. If that quiet clarity speaks to you, if the thoughts of Marcus Epictetus and Seneca help anchor you, then consider staying. Subscribe if it feels right. Join a space where reflection comes before reaction. You're welcome here. Now picture Marcus in the pale Roman morning light, sitting alone in his tent, scribbling into what we now call meditations, not to impress anyone, not to publish, but to remember how to be calm in a storm, strong without harshness, gentle without weakness. You may not lead an empire, but your life is no less complex. You have demands, decisions, deadlines, and yet, like Marcus, you can begin by asking, what is mine to control today? What virtues will I practice? How will I choose to respond when things don't go my way? The world won't wait, but you can. The modern world feels allergic to stillness. We equate movement with progress, noise with success. But Marcus flipped that idea. His greatness didn't come from shouting the loudest. It came from returning again and again to his center and ruling from there. The metaphor is simple. A tree rooted deeply, winds come, branches sway, leaves fall, but the tree stands because it is anchored. You too can be anchored, but only if you choose to begin each morning, not by reacting, but by remembering. So as your own day unfolds, ask yourself, what kind of emperor will you be over your own time, your own thoughts, your own emotions? That first breath, that first thought, that quiet moment before the rush, that is your throne room. You step outside and the noise begins. It might be traffic, it might be your inbox, it might be the anxious thoughts that start running before your feet even hit the ground. For Marcus Aurelius, the noise came in the form of military uprisings, political betrayals, and the unrelenting chaos of an empire strained by plague, war, and corruption. And yet, he stayed composed, not because the noise didn't reach him, but because it never entered his mind, without permission. The tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say, or think, or do. Only what you do, he wrote. You read that line again, not as advice, but as instruction. Because while the world outside may be turbulent, the world inside can remain still, if you train it to be. Imagine Marcus riding through a war-torn frontier, the fate of Rome pressing on his shoulders, yet inside he's silent, not empty, not numb, just calm, a storm around a still point. The difference between him and the rest wasn't what he faced, but how he faced it. And you too face your own invasions, deadlines, distractions, harsh words, unfair judgments. It's easy to let them in, to let them dictate your emotional weather. But Marcus shows you something different, that you are not obligated to entertain every disturbance that knocks at your gate. You begin to wonder how much of your daily stress comes not from events themselves, but from your reaction to them. Can you create a kind of emotional fortress, not of stone, but of clarity? Consider the ocean. Its surface may rage with waves, but in its depths, there is stillness. You can be like that. Let the surface respond, move, adapt, but keep the core calm. When the outside world accelerates, your response can be to slow down internally. You breathe, you return. You remember that you are not what happens to you. You are what you do with it. This isn't denial. Marcus never pretended the world was gentle. He just refused to let it shape his soul without consent. He didn't fight chaos by meeting it with more chaos. He met it with order, not external order, but inner alignment. So as the day throws its jabs, ask yourself, am I reacting blindly or am I choosing how to move? Are you the marble being carved by events or the sculptor, choosing where to chisel, even when things feel personal? Marcus reminds you, it's not the insult that wounds you, it's the decision to let it matter. It's not the crisis that breaks you, it's how you see yourself inside of it. And when you remember that, a kind of dignity returns. The world may remain loud, but inside, there is stillness, not because nothing's wrong, but because you have remembered your role. You are not a leaf in the wind. You are the rooted tree. You picture him now, Marcus Aurelius, seated quietly at a worn desk or inside his military tent, stylus in hand, scratching his thoughts into wax tablets. There's no crowd, no audience, just a man and the moment, not trying to impress, just trying to stay whole. You've felt this need before to write, not because you're a writer, but because life feels too heavy to hold in your head, alone. That's what Marcus did. His meditations weren't meant for the world. They were private, personal, a self-dialogue meant to organize the chaos before it swallowed him. He was the emperor of the known world, but in his writings you see someone uncertain, struggling, reminding himself how to be. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. He didn't write that to teach you. He wrote it to survive. You begin to see the page not as a place to perform, but as a mirror, a sounding board, a sanctuary. When the world is loud, writing helps quiet it. When thoughts spiral, writing straightens them, not always with answers, but always with a return to clarity. Think of a foggy window. When you write, it's like wiping the glass, revealing what's been in front of you all along. That's what Marcus did, over and over again. Each line in Meditations is a sweep of the cloth, a clearing of the mind. You don't need to be eloquent, you just need to be honest. What am I feeling? What do I fear? What part of this is within my control? These are not grand questions, they are survival questions. And for Marcus, they were essential. You notice too that writing forces stillness. It asks you to slow your mind down to the speed of your hand. That's a kind of discipline one the modern world resists. We scroll, we skim, we rush past the root of things. But when you sit to write, you anchor yourself. You choose presence. Think of a river, overflowing its banks. Chaos is like that, fast, loud, dangerous. But when you carve a channel, when you give the river somewhere to go, it flows again, contained, directed. Writing is that channel. You don't need a wax tablet or a Roman tent, a napkin, a phone note, a scrap of paper will do. What matters is the act, the decision to meet yourself on the page, instead of losing yourself in the noise. So the question becomes, are you carrying your thoughts or are you emptying them? Marcus used his journal not to escape life, but to return to it with clearer eyes. So can you. And maybe the next time your mind feels too full, you'll pause and say, let me write this down, not because it will fix everything, but because it reminds you, you are not the chaos. You are the one who sees it, shapes it, sets it down. You imagine yourself standing in a grand marble hall, The echoes of decisions ripple out into the lives of thousands. You hold the power to reward, to punish, to command armies, and rewrite laws. What would that do to your sense of self? For most, power is like a drug, subtle at first, then all-consuming. But Marcus Aurelius held the Roman Empire in his hands and never mistook that role for who he was. It's not the job of a good man, he wrote, to worry about whether he's praised or blamed, but simply to do what's right. That kind of humility from an emperor isn't accidental, it's earned every day in small acts of restraint. You can feel that lesson pressing on you even now. You may not rule an empire, but you have influence in your family, at work, online. And the question Marcus keeps asking you is, will you use it to serve or to feed your ego? Think of the sun. It gives warmth and light to everything it touches, but it never demands applause. Marcus believed leadership should be like that. Quiet, consistent, necessary, no boasting, no performance, just duty fulfilled. And what about praise? Marcus knew how dangerous it could be. Compliments inflate the ego, criticism deflates it. But the Stoic way teaches your value isn't up for vote. It's not found in likes or applause or admiration. It's in your actions, your principles, your ability to stand steady, no matter what others say. You might ask yourself, when I do something good, do I look around to see who's watching? That's the kind of honesty Marcus demanded from himself. He worked to become immune to flattery, not because he didn't appreciate kindness, but because he refused to become dependent on it. There's a powerful Stoic metaphor here, one Marcus would have appreciated. Imagine a tall lighthouse, standing still as waves crash against it. Storms rage around it, and sailors look to it for guidance. The lighthouse doesn't ask to be thanked. It just stands, strong, unshaken, necessary. You can be that kind of person too. And yes, pride whispers. It tells you you've earned your power, that you're special, that others should admire you. But Marcus reminds you, you're just a part of the whole. Nature didn't crown you, it gave you a role, and you're here to play it well, not to demand recognition. You reflect on your own life. Have you ever felt bigger than you are, or smaller because someone else was praised? Marcus would gently ask, what if you measured success only by your own standards, by your own integrity? So today, whether you're managing people or simply managing yourself, consider how you carry your power. Is it quiet, steady, generous, or does it hunger to be seen? To Marcus, greatness was never about being above others. It was about being grounded enough to walk beside them. You step outside, and the world begins to fill with people. Some kind, some careless, some caught in their own storms. It's inevitable. Wherever you go, people will bring their moods, their motives, their misunderstandings. Marcus Aurelius knew this better than anyone. He began his days by preparing for it. Today, he wrote, you will meet people who are meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they don't know the difference between good and evil. He didn't say this with bitterness. He said it with acceptance, with calm foresight, as if to remind himself that people are not obstacles to peace. They are part of the terrain of life. And just like bad weather or traffic, they are not worth losing your inner balance over. You reflect on this and realize, how often are you surprised when people act like people? How often do you expect patience from the impatient, kindness from the unaware, fairness from those ruled by ego? Marcus's preemptive reflection wasn't pessimism. It was armor, a way to enter the day already braced, not to withdraw, but to walk forward with strength and perspective. If you expect the world to always meet your ideals, you'll be constantly offended. But if you prepare for its rough edges, you'll remain intact. Think of a mountain hiker. She checks the forecast, laces her boots, brings a raincoat even if it's sunny. She hopes for the best, but prepares for the real. That's what Marcus did every morning, and that's what you can do now. You can ask, who might I meet today? What behavior might I witness? And how will I choose to respond? Not from instinct, but from intention. This doesn't mean you lower your standards. It means you stop giving your peace away for free. You stop being shocked when others live according to their impulses rather than your expectations. Marcus didn't excuse bad behavior. He just stopped being surprised by it. And in doing so, he stayed free. You can too. A metaphor lingers. Imagine walking through a crowded marketplace. People bump you, shout over each other, haggle, complain. Would you take every jostle personally, or would you move through with awareness protected by your mindset? Your mindset is your shield, and Marcus polished his daily not through resentment, but through realism. You begin to see that preparation is not about control. It's about emotional flexibility. It's about being so rooted in your values that no one else can knock you off balance. So when someone interrupts you, disappoints you, criticizes you unfairly, pause. Remember, this is not unexpected. This is not about you. This is simply part of the path you've already trained for. The question is not whether people will frustrate you. The question is whether you'll let them dictate the quality of your mind. And in that small space between what they do and how you respond, you find your power. You sit quietly, watching a situation unfold, a rude comment, a long delay, an unexpected problem. Instinct kicks in, irritation, judgment, stress. But then you pause, because something Marcus Aurelius once wrote returns to you if you are distressed by anything external. The pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment. It's one of the most liberating ideas in all of Stoicism, that events themselves are neutral. It's your perception, your interpretation, that gives them shape and meaning. This is not easy. It's not automatic. It's a discipline. And Marcus practiced it daily. Imagine him again learning that a trusted general betrayed him, or that a province had revolted, or that plague continued to spread through Rome. Each one could have broken him, but instead, he filtered each event through a Stoic lens. Is this within my control? If not, what response honors my principles? You can do the same. When someone cuts you off in traffic, you might feel insulted. When a friend forgets to call, you might feel rejected. But these emotions don't come from the event. They come from the story you attach to it. What if the driver was rushing to the hospital? What if your friend is silently struggling? Perception is everything, and perception can be trained. Think of a photographer adjusting a lens. With one filter, the scene looks dark, harsh, distorted. With another, it becomes clear, balanced, full of subtle beauty. Life is no different. You choose the lens. Marcus didn't deny reality. He sharpened his ability to see it clearly without the fog of assumptions or ego. That's what he meant when he urged himself to strip things down to their essential form. He wanted to face events as they were, not as his emotions tried to make them. Ask yourself now, what if I could pause before reacting? What if I asked, is my judgment clouding my peace? This doesn't mean becoming cold or indifferent. It means becoming wise. It means learning to respond instead of react. You recall a metaphor, the sky and the clouds. Your mind is the sky, vast, clear, steady. Your thoughts are clouds, temporary, shifting, sometimes stormy. But no matter how thick the clouds get, the sky remains untouched. Marcus trained himself to live from that place, from the sky, not the storm. And so can you. Start small. The next time something frustrates you, pause. Ask, what story am I telling myself about this? Is it true? Is it helpful? What would Marcus see here? Maybe the missed opportunity is a redirection. Maybe the rude comment is a reflection of someone else's suffering. Maybe the delay is a moment to breathe. This doesn't make pain disappear, but it keeps pain from multiplying unnecessarily. And in a world of noise, urgency, and blame, choosing clarity over confusion is a quiet kind of rebellion. You reclaim your day not by changing the world, but by changing how you see it. You sit with the thought uncomfortable. At first, you will die. Not someday far away in the abstract, but truly, inevitably. And so did Marcus. Every day, in fact, he faced death, not to dwell in sorrow, but to deepen his sense of life. You could leave life right now, he wrote. Let that determine what you do say and think. This wasn't morbid, it was clarifying, a call to presence, to priority. Imagine Marcus in his palace or on the front lines of battle, taking a moment not just to plan his actions, but to reflect on the limits of his time. He knew that emperors like peasants would meet the same end, that memory would fade, statues would crumble, names would vanish into dust, and rather than depress him, this freed him. You feel that freedom too, even now, when you dare to look at life with full honesty, when you stop pretending you have infinite time, when you realize that delaying your values is just another form of forgetting them. Modern life doesn't like to talk about death. It wraps it in euphemisms or ignores it altogether. But Marcus reminds you, looking away doesn't make it less true, and only by looking directly at death can you decide what really matters. Consider the sand in an hourglass. You don't know how many grains remain, but you do know they're falling. Each one is a choice to complain, or to create, to fear, or to be grateful, to drift, or to act. Marcus used death as a compass. He would ask, will this matter when I'm gone? And if the answer was no, he let it go. Ego, grudges, prestige, they lost their grip when held up to death's light. You too can use this practice not to fear the end, but to illuminate the present. Think of your time like a candle. It burns no matter what you do, but you can either burn it unconsciously, flickering through distractions, or you can warm the world with its flame. There's a kind of courage in facing mortality. It strips away the non-essential. It asks, if this were your last week, how would you treat others? What would you say? What would no longer deserve your anger, and what beauty you begin to see in ordinary things? When you remember they are not promised, the sound of laughter, a hand on your shoulder, a sunrise, these are not guarantees, they are gifts. Marcus believed that freedom came from remembering death, not once, but often, not in fear, but in reverence. And every time he reminded himself of life's brevity, he walked more lightly, more intentionally, more awake. You can too. So tonight or tomorrow morning, ask yourself, not with panic, but with presence, what if this were my last day? What would I make of it? You may find that the things you were worried about no longer hold weight, and the things you've taken for granted shine with unexpected gold. To remember, death is not to die. It is to live without illusion. You encounter resistance. Something blocks your path, a delay in plans, a rejection, a personal failure. The instinct is to retreat, to complain, to see the obstacle as a sign to stop. But Marcus Aurelius reminds you of something else entirely. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. This is one of his most famous lines, not because it's poetic, but because it's deeply practical. It reframes your entire relationship to struggle. To Marcus, obstacles aren't detours from the path. They are the path. You think about this and realize, how often have you let frustration stall your momentum? How often have you assumed the presence of difficulty meant you were doing something wrong? But Marcus flips that thinking. The presence of difficulty may mean you're exactly where you should be. Imagine him facing an impossible decision, his generals divided, his people anxious, the enemy closing in. It's not a riddle to escape, it's an invitation to rise. And not just for him, for you too. You reflect on a tree growing in rocky soil. It doesn't complain, it adapts. It sinks its roots deeper. And because of that resistance, it becomes stronger than if it had grown in soft earth. That's what Marcus wants for you. Not comfort, but strength built from effort. You start to understand you don't need to remove the obstacle. You need to meet it differently. An unexpected bill isn't just a problem, it's a moment to practice composure. A hurtful comment isn't just pain, it's a chance to practice forgiveness. A lost opportunity isn't just a closed door, it's a moment to build resilience. Marcus didn't magically avoid hardship. He endured betrayal, illness, the death of children, wars he didn't choose. And through it all, he trained his mind not to shrink, but to search. What virtue can I practice here? What skill can I develop? How can I let this refine me? Instead of define me, you can ask the same. This mindset isn't blind optimism. It's rooted realism. It says, this is here, I didn't want it. But now that it's here, what can I do with it? Think of metal in a fire. The flame doesn't destroy it. It tempers it, makes it sharper, more durable. The Stoic path teaches you to be like that, to welcome the forge, not flee from it. So the next time something blocks you, don't just ask, how do I get around this? Ask, how can I move through this? What is this trying to teach me? What if this isn't happening to me? But for me, you begin to sense it. Peace not from avoiding life's weight, but from learning how to carry it with purpose. This is what Marcus practiced. This is what you are capable of too. The obstacle doesn't end your path. It begins your transformation. You walk into a room, buzzing with conversation, people talking, laughing, posturing. Their energy brushes against you, some of it warm, some of it sharp. It's easy to lose yourself in it, to start mimicking the mood, chasing approval, bending to the room. But Marcus Aurelius teaches something different, something powerful. He says, nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. This was not a man writing from a remote mountaintop. He was often surrounded by senators, soldiers, citizens, and endless demands. And still he found solitude. You realize solitude is not about being alone. It's about being anchored. You can be in a crowd and still not lose your center. You can be surrounded and still be still. This is what Marcus practiced. Amid council meetings and battlefield chaos, he turned inward, not to escape, but to recalibrate, to ask what matters. What am I in control of? What does this moment require of me? You can do this too, right here, right now. The noise around you doesn't need to become the noise within you. Picture yourself as a lighthouse again. Ships pass, waves crash, weather changes, but the foundation remains. Steady, constant. You don't chase the ships. You don't argue with the storm. You just remain lit. That's what solitude looks like. Not emptiness, but clarity in motion. You start to see how much energy you lose, trying to manage impressions, trying to fit in, trying to be understood by everyone. Marcus knew the cost of that too, so he chose to measure himself only by one standard. Did I act according to reason and virtue? If yes, then the crowd's judgment didn't matter. He reminds you the world is full of opinions, but none of them define you. You don't need everyone to agree with you. You don't need every gesture to be approved. You just need to live aligned. And so even in noisy places, you learn to return to yourself. A breath, a thought, a moment of inward stillness. There's a metaphor for this in music. In an orchestra, every instrument has its place. But imagine if every player tried to match the loudest sound. It would be chaos. Harmony comes not from volume, but from each one staying true to its role. You are like that. You don't have to be louder. You don't have to match the chaos. You just have to hold your tone, your principles, your stillness. You ask yourself in a crowd, am I performing or am I present? Because solitude isn't a place you go, it's a presence you carry. And when you develop it, You never lose yourself again, not in noise, not in praise, not in pressure. You begin to understand the quieter your mind, the louder your clarity. And in a world addicted to attention, choosing inner calm is not weakness, it's your hidden strength. You walk through your day, surrounded by others, but the most constant voice is the one in your own head. The inner commentary, the judgments, the encouragement, the doubts. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. He guarded his inner world like a fortress, knowing that the quality of his thoughts determined the quality of his life. Your mind will take the shape of what you frequently hold in thought, he wrote. For the human spirit is colored by such impressions. You pause with that, because it's easy to think of influence as something external, peers, media, society. But what about the company you keep inside, the stories you replay, the beliefs you never question? Marcus made it his daily practice to discipline his inner voice. He reminded himself of Stoic truths, not to sound wise, but to stay sane. He knew if you allow your mind to be a dumping ground for worry, vanity, resentment, you become what you consume. You begin to reflect. If someone spoke to you the way your thoughts sometimes do, would you allow them in your home? There's a metaphor here. Imagine your mind is a garden. Every thought is a seed. Some grow flowers, others weeds. Marcus cultivated his garden with care, pulling out useless thoughts, planting intentional ones, seeds of clarity, justice, courage, humility. So you ask, what do I plant in my mental soil each morning? You recall how quickly one anxious thought can spiral into a narrative of fear, or how one envious glance online can birth dissatisfaction with your own life. The Stoics didn't ignore this. They anticipated it, and they worked daily to replace those impulses with reasoned perspective. Marcus also understood the power of role models, not just externally, but internally. When facing a challenge, he would recall the virtues of others. What would Antoninus do? He'd ask of his adopted father, a model of discipline and calm. You can do this too. Think of the people alive or dead whose character you admire. Let them sit beside you, quietly shaping your next move. In your solitude, you are never truly alone. You are always surrounded by voices, past experiences, old beliefs, absorbed expectations. But you can choose who gets to speak loudest. You begin to see your inner world as a council. Are the voices calm or reactive? Are they wise or afraid? To Marcus, wisdom wasn't about having the right answers. It was about guarding your mind from pollution, emotional noise, ego-driven narratives, unexamined assumptions. And so the practice begins. When a harsh thought appears, pause. Ask, is this useful? Is it fair? Is it true? When an anxious projection arises, ask, is this within my control? What virtue can I practice instead? You start to realize peace doesn't come from controlling every thought. It comes from choosing which ones to follow. Your mind becomes less like a battlefield and more like a temple. Because in the end, as Marcus knew, you become what you think repeatedly. So keep good company, especially with yourself. You do the right thing, but no one notices. You help, and no one thanks you. You give your best, and the outcome is uncertain or disappointing. It's tempting to feel bitter, to think, why bother? But Marcus Aurelius answers that quietly. Clearly, do not waste what remains of your life in speculating about others. Be satisfied if you can live the rest of your life in accord with your own nature. To Marcus, virtue is its own reward. You act not because it will be seen or praised, but because it's who you are. A Stoic doesn't wait for applause. A Stoic acts because it is the right thing to do. You feel this tension in your own life, the desire to be appreciated, the hope that your efforts will be recognized. And there's nothing wrong with being seen. But when you become dependent on it, your peace becomes fragile. The Stoic practice is to release attachment to outcomes, not in apathy, but in freedom. You sow the seed, you water the plant, but you do not control the harvest. Imagine a craftsman building a table. He works carefully, shaping each corner with skill, not for fame, not for wealth, but because craftsmanship is who he is. The outcome, whether it's admired or forgotten, doesn't change the care he gives. That's Stoic virtue in motion. You begin to ask, what would my actions look like if no one was watching? Would I still show up the same way? Marcus teaches that the answer must be yes, because the real audience is always you, your character, your values, your inner scoreboard. There's a metaphor here. Think of the sun. It rises each day, gives light, sustains life, and never demands applause. It simply fulfills its nature. Can you do the same? Act generously, even if no one thanks you. Act courageously, even if fear still lingers. Act truthfully, even if lies seem louder. Each time you do, you reinforce your inner foundation. You stop being a puppet of praise or fear. Marcus wrote, "Let each thing you would do, say, or intend be like that of a dying person," meaning be urgent, be honest, and don't waste time seeking validation. You can begin practicing this in small ways. Help someone without telling anyone. Work hard even when the reward isn't clear. Apologize sincerely, expecting nothing in return. These quiet acts of discipline shape a powerful kind of person, one whose integrity does not depend on the world's reaction, because when you act only for outcomes, you become reactive. But when you act from principle, you become consistent, and consistency builds trust, not just from others, but from yourself. Marcus didn't control how Rome remembered him. He didn't know meditations would survive. He just wrote, he just led, he just lived in alignment. You can do the same, not for credit, but for character. You pause and take a breath, noticing the rhythm of your chest rising and falling. There's something ancient about that rhythm, something shared by every person who's ever lived. Marcus Aurelius returned to it often, not just breath, but nature itself. To live in agreement with nature, he wrote, that is the source of good. But what does that mean? In a modern world of noise, speed, and concrete, for Marcus it meant aligning your actions with reason, accepting change as constant, and flowing with life instead of resisting it. Nature isn't just trees and rivers, it's also truth, order, impermanence. It's the seasons shifting without complaint, the tide rising and falling, the fox growing old. It's your body aging. It's joy arriving, then grief, then calm again. Marcus didn't romanticize nature, he respected it. He saw it as a model of how to live with adaptability, with purpose, without resistance. You start to realize so many of your frustrations come from fighting what is. You want people to act differently. You want time to slow down. You want outcomes to match expectations. But nature doesn't care for demands. It simply is. And peace comes from adjusting yourself to it, not the other way around. There's a metaphor here. Imagine a river. You can stand in it, yelling at the current, trying to stop it, or you can float with it, using your strength to steer but never to dam it. The Stoic lives this way, participating in life but not controlling it. You reflect on your place in the larger web. You are not the center, you are a part. And like every part of nature, your job is not to dominate, but to contribute. Marcus often reminded himself, I am a human being, part of a social whole. My role is to serve, to think, to live in harmony with the greater design. And that harmony includes accepting what happens, not passively, but without resentment. If winter comes, you wear a coat. If loss arrives, you grieve. If opportunity knocks, you answer. But you never curse the flow of time. This mindset doesn't make you weak, it makes you fluid, able to bend without breaking, to adjust without losing direction. You ask yourself, am I resisting life or working with it? Am I clinging to permanence in a world designed for change? The Stoics didn't aim to escape reality. They aimed to embrace it fully. Marcus knew he couldn't stop aging, or illness, or betrayal, or death, but he could choose to meet each with grace. You can too, by rising when it's your turn to act, by resting when it's time to let go, by flowing with the current instead of thrashing against it. This is not surrender, it's wisdom, it's trust that the nature of things, though unpredictable, is not your enemy. And when you live this way, something softens. Your shoulders drop, your breath slows, your mind clears, because you're no longer at war with life. You are walking beside it. You imagine a fortress not made of stone, but of clarity. Inside the noise of the world fades. You sit there, quietly, and remember what Marcus Aurelius called the inner citadel, a place within that no one can touch without your permission. This is the core of Stoic strength, not muscles or armor, but the ability to remain intact when everything around you breaks apart. A man's fortress is his own reason. Marcus wrote, he believed that deep within each of us has a space the world cannot invade unless we open the gates. You begin to understand your inner citadel is not built overnight. It's shaped by daily decisions. Each time you resist a petty argument, hold a generous silence, meet difficulty with virtue, you lay a new stone, you fortify the walls, and this fortress doesn't isolate you, it frees you. Because when your peace no longer depends on what others do, say, or believe, you become unconquerable. Think of a fireproof room. It doesn't fear the flame, or a clear lake undisturbed by the ripples at the surface. You are becoming like that, not indifferent but composed, not unreachable but untouchable in your center. Marcus was tested constantly. He saw death, disease, betrayal, war, but within his inner citadel he returned to the same question: what is mine to do? He couldn't stop the empire from suffering, but he could govern himself with patience, with courage, with clarity. That's what you're doing too. You begin to see. Most suffering comes not from the world, but from how we let it inside, how we attach to expectations, how we absorb every insult, how we believe every fear. But inside the citadel, you create space, space to pause, to breathe, to decide. Here you ask better questions. Is this worth my peace? Does this align with who I want to be? What virtue can I practice right now? Even in this, your answers don't need to be perfect. They just need to be honest, because the more you return to your citadel, the stronger it becomes. Not hard like a wall, but solid like a tree with deep roots. The Stoics didn't promise invincibility. They promised stability, an ability to live upright in a world that bends. And the citadel was their way of doing it, of protecting the only thing that truly belongs to you, your mind. So the next time life knocks, or storms rise, or people misunderstand you, retreat, not into hiding, but into that deep inner space where your values live. And from there, act with dignity, with calm, with strength that no one can give, and no one can take away. Because the citadel is not a place you visit, it is who you are becoming. Now you sit at the end of this path, not with grand answers, but with clearer eyes. You've walked beside Marcus, through early mornings and silent journaling, through hardship, humility, and hope. And what you've learned isn't a system, it's a way of being. Stoicism doesn't remove the weight of life. It teaches you how to carry it with grace. You've seen how Marcus faced chaos without losing himself, not because he had perfect control, but because he focused on what was his to govern his mind, his choices, his response. That's where peace is born, not from the absence of difficulty, but from the presence of discipline. And so you ask yourself gently, what do I want to become unshakable In Where Do I Still Give Away My Peace Too Easily? What would Marcus remind me to remember? Today, you may not wear a crown or command legions, but you, like him, are tested daily by irritation, by fear, by distraction, and each time you choose reflection over reaction, courage over comfort, integrity over impulse, you strengthen your inner citadel. This is the Stoic path, quiet, honest, lifelong, and you are on it now. So step forward, not loudly, not perfectly, but with intention, because the world may not grow calmer, but you can, and that changes everything.